February 18, 1939. 2:14 a.m. The sub-basement of the Cotton Club, 644 Lenox Avenue. The air in the concrete room was cold enough to see breath, but sweat beaded on the foreheads of the two men standing by the boiler. In the center of the room sat Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, tied to a wooden chair. His hands were bound with piano wire. His eyes were uncovered. Opposite him stood Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, the most prolific killer in the history of Murder Inc. Strauss had killed 30 men in 6 states with ice picks, ropes, and revolvers. He had never failed a contract. He had never returned a deposit. On the table between them sat a brown leather satchel containing $25,000 in small bills, the bounty paid by Dutch Schultz's remnants to erase the man who refused to bow. Strauss held a heavy-handled ice pick, testing the point against his thumb. He looked at Bumpy like a butcher inspecting a side of beef. By all accounts, Bumpy Johnson was a dead man. The most efficient killing machine in America had him bound in a soundproof basement, while the jazz band played Minnie the Moocher 3 floors above. But Bumpy wasn't looking at the ice pick. He was looking at the clock on the wall, and he was smiling. Because Bumpy knew that in exactly 60 seconds, the man holding the weapon would be the one begging for his life. 3 weeks earlier, the shadow war for Harlem had reached a fever pitch. Bumpy Johnson was 33 years old, a rising warlord in the chaotic vacuum left by the declining power of the Jewish mobsters. He was not yet the undisputed Godfather, but he was the sharpest blade in the drawer. He moved with the elegance of a panther and the tactical mind of a general. He didn't just run numbers, he curated loyalty. He paid for Mrs. Williams' rent when her husband died. He bought school shoes for the kids on 116th Street. He was building a kingdom on a foundation of gratitude, not just fear. But 1939 was a dangerous year. The Dutch Schultz gang, though, their leader was dead, still had deep pockets and deeper grudges. They saw Bumpy not as a partner, but as a usurper, a colored boy who had forgotten who owned the pavement. They wanted the policy banks back. They wanted the 40% cut of the Harlem rackets restored. The tension was palpable on every corner of Lenox Avenue. 2 of Bumpy's runners had been found floating in the Harlem River. A bomb had been thrown through the window of a dry cleaner that served as a Bumpy front. The Schultz faction knew they couldn't beat Bumpy in the streets. His army was too loyal. So they decided to outsource the problem. They went to the Brownsville section of Brooklyn. They went to Midnight Rose's candy store. They hired Murder Inc. The contract was simple: kill Bumpy Johnson, make it messy, make it public. Murder Inc. was the enforcement arm of the National Crime Syndicate. They were cold, professional, and unstoppable. When they took a job, the target was already a ghost. They accepted the $25,000 fee without hesitation. Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss was not a man, he was a catastrophe in a fedora. Strauss was a sociopath who treated murder with the casual indifference of a man filing his taxes. He once killed a man in a crowded movie theater and finished watching the film. He had killed in Miami, Detroit, and Brooklyn. He didn't care about politics. He didn't care about territory. He cared about the mechanics of death. He was chosen for the Bumpy contract because he was an outsider. He had no respect for Harlem's hierarchy. He viewed Bumpy Johnson as just another name on a ledger, another $1,000 bonus. Strauss brought his favorite partner, Martin Bugsy Goldstein. Together, they were a scythe. They spent 3 days stalking Bumpy, learning his routine, memorizing his favorite tables at Small's Paradise and the frantic rhythm of his afternoons. They didn't want a shootout. Shootouts were messy. Strauss preferred intimacy. He wanted to look Bumpy in the eye. On February 17th, they made their move. They ambushed Bumpy as he exited a poker game on 135th Street, pistol-whipping him unconscious before his bodyguards could react. They threw him into the back of a delivery truck and drove him to the one place in Harlem where no one could hear a scream, the sub-basement of the mob-controlled Cotton Club. Strauss had the money. He had the man. He had the tools. This guy thinks he's a king, Strauss had sneered to Goldstein as they dragged Bumpy down the stairs. Tonight, he's just meat. The basement was a tomb of gray concrete and rusted pipes. The only light came from a single bulb dangling on a frayed wire, casting long, twitching shadows against the damp walls. The boiler hummed with a low, menacing drone vibrating the floor. Bumpy woke up with a splitting headache and the taste of copper in his mouth. He tested the piano wire. It bit into his wrists, tight and professional. Strauss and Goldstein stood over him. Strauss had removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms thick with muscle and hair. "Wakey, wakey, Your Majesty," Strauss whispered, leaning close. "You know who we are?" Bumpy cleared his throat. He spat a glob of blood onto the concrete. "You're the guys who are going to lose 25 grand tonight." Strauss laughed, a dry, barking sound. He picked up the leather satchel and shook it. "We already got the money, pal. Now we just got to deliver the receipt. That's you." At 2:18 a.m., Strauss circled the chair. He picked up the ice pick. "We heard you're smart," Strauss said, tapping the pick against Bumpy's shoulder. "We heard you play chess. What's your move now, genius? You got no pawns. You got no knights." The sensory details were overwhelming. The smell of coal dust and fear. The dripping of a leaky pipe in the corner, drip, 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 keeping time like a metronome of doom. The muffled thump of the bass drum from the orchestra upstairs. Strauss raised the pick. "Say goodnight, Bumpy. Check your pocket," Bumpy said. His voice wasn't a plea. It was a command. Strauss paused. The ice pick hovered 6 inches from Bumpy's chest. "What?" "Your jacket pocket," Bumpy said calmly. "The inside left one. Check it." Strauss frowned. He looked at Goldstein, who shrugged nervously. Strauss lowered the pick slowly. He reached over to where his suit jacket hung on a rusted valve. He patted the pocket. He felt something stiff. He reached in and pulled out a photograph. It was a black and white photo, grainy but clear. It showed a woman walking out of a grocery store in Brownsville, Brooklyn. She was holding the hand of a small girl with ribbons in her hair. Strauss went pale. The blood drained from his face so fast he looked like he might faint. "That's your sister," Bumpy said. "Esther. And your niece, Sarah. 1422 Pitkin Avenue." Then, Bumpy shifted his gaze to Goldstein. "Marty, check your right shoe." Goldstein, hands trembling, knelt down. He reached into his sock. He pulled out a folded piece of paper. It was a receipt for a deposit made that morning at a bank in the Bronx. A deposit made in his mother's name. "How?" Strauss whispered. The ice pick clattered to the floor. What Murder Inc. didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson didn't just have spies in Harlem. He had spies in the Postal Service. Bumpy knew that the Schultz mob was desperate. He anticipated the contract. He knew they would go to the best. 2 weeks prior, Bumpy had contacted a childhood friend who worked as a mail sorter in the main Brooklyn distribution center. He had him watch for any correspondence going to the known hangouts of the Murder Inc. crew. He mapped their lives. He found their soft spots. Bumpy allowed himself to be taken. The ambush on 135th Street? Bumpy's bodyguards were ordered to stand down. The unconscious stayed in the truck. Feigned. Bumpy needed to get Strauss and Goldstein alone. He needed to be in a room where they felt safe, where their guard was down to deliver the checkmate. People are watching your people right now," Bumpy said, his voice dropping an octave, filling the cold room with authority. "They have instructions. If I don't call a specific number at the drugstore on 125th Street by 2:30 a.m., well, Brownsville is going to have a very sad morning." It was 2:22 a.m. Strauss looked at the clock. He looked at the photo of his sister. The sociopath who felt nothing for his victims was paralyzed by the threat to his own blood. "You're bluffing," Goldstein stammered. "Am I?" Bumpy smiled. "I knew you were coming before you left Brooklyn. I knew exactly where you'd take me." "Do you really think I'd sit in this chair if I didn't hold the keys to the handcuffs?" Bumpy nodded at the satchel. "That 25 grand? That's your severance pay. You take it, you go back to the Schultz boys, and you give it back." Strauss stared at Bumpy for the first time in his life. The predator felt like prey. He realized He wasn't dealing with a gangster. He was dealing with a grandmaster who treated his own life as a gambit. Strauss walked over to the chair. He didn't use the ice pick. He used a pocket knife to slice the wire snapped with a twang. Bumpy rubbed his wrists, the red lines deep and angry. Strauss stepped back, holding the photograph of his sister like it was a holy relic. "You call that number?" Strauss said, his voice shaking. "You call it right now." "I will," Bumpy said, standing up and brushing the cold dust from his suit. "As soon as you walk out that door." At 2:28 a.m., two of the most dangerous men in America walked out of the Cotton Club basement, leaving their victim alive. They didn't run, but they walked fast. They carried the satchel of money like it was radioactive. They drove straight to the Schultz gang's headquarters in the Bronx. Strauss walked in, threw the bag on the table, and said 4 words that became legend in the underworld: "We don't touch him." The Schultz lieutenants were baffled. "Why? Is he too guarded?" "He's a ghost," Strauss reportedly said. "He was in my house before I was. You want him dead, you do it yourself." The ripple effects were seismic. The fact that Murder Inc., the grim reapers of the mob, had refused a contract on Bumpy Johnson gave him an aura of invincibility that no gun could provide. The Schultz gang, realizing they had no instrument left to strike with, backed down. Bumpy walked out of the Cotton Club at 2:35 a.m. He bought a newspaper from a stand on Lenox Avenue. He tipped the boy $1. This encounter in the basement of the Cotton Club redefined the rules of engagement for Bumpy Johnson. It proved that intelligence is the ultimate weapon. Bumpy defeated a physical threat with psychological warfare. He understood that even monsters have things they love, and that leverage is more powerful than violence. He didn't fight Strauss. He outthought him. He turned the hitman's own ruthless efficiency against him. The lesson is timeless. If you want to stop a man's hand, you must first hold his heart. Bumpy Johnson survived, not because he was the strongest, but because he did his homework. He knew that in the game of survival, information is the only ammunition that matters. If this story blew your mind, hit that subscribe button. Drop a like if you respect the man who made Murder Inc. Blink. Comment below. What is the smartest move you've ever seen in a high-stakes situation? Next week, the time Bumpy Johnson broke out of prison just to eat a sandwich in Harlem.